Is that Sid Smith? I'm Sean Hewitt. I'm here in a special constructed cell at Broadmoor. And my friend Sid is in a much more luxurious open prison. We've been sentenced by the music police for crimes related to this series of podcasts. And what we're doing today, because of the time caused by the activities of our respective prisons, is a compacted episode, telescoped, 2 albums, telescoped into one fact and fun-packed episode of Idiot Wind, our journey through Dylan vinyl, the definitive collection. This is episode 30 and 31, ladies and gentlemen. A bit of a landmark. The first time we've done 2 episodes in one, and the first time we've reached episode 30. It's how do you feel about that, Sid?
I'm just completely agog with excitement.
I can tell that you can't keep that thrill out of your voice.
No.
Well, today we're at a point where Bob is at again another one of his dips. He's live. He isn't live. He has reinvented himself, and he is thrilling old and new audiences with the never-ending tour, so-called, not by him. But he does at least 70 or 80 gigs every year at this point, often more. He changes sets nightly. He goes deep into his catalogue. He produces a whole range of original.
Hang on. Did you just say he changes sex nightly?
Set lists.
Oh, right.
Jesus Christ. God in heaven. It's like talking to an idiot. Anyway, and he is on this never-ending tour, and that seems to be where all his energy is really, and his concentration is going. Between the late lamented Under the Red Sky and his next studio album of original material, there's a 6-year gap. And in terms of his recording career, it's basically mainly filled by these 2 albums we're going to talk about today. Both of them are unusual in that for the first time since his first album, he's on his own. He's on his own, and he's just singing other people's songs for the first time ever. These are all old songs, blues and folk songs from the American kind of era. They're his version of the songs that he thought made him. This album we're going to talk about now, which is called Good As I'd Been to You, was recorded. The production is production supervised by Debbie Gold for the Gold Network. Well, Debbie Gold is a friend of Bob's. I don't know what the Gold Network is. Maybe it is a company. It probably isn't, due to the reliability of these album notes. And it was recorded and mixed by an engineer called Micah Jar Ryan. And Micah Jar said the legend of this album was Bob just recorded it in his garage. That's the constantly repeated line. And that is basically true. He had a big house he'd designed himself with Sarah years before at Malibu. He's still got that now. He still lived there a lot of the time. And he'd had the garage converted into a studio, so he could record if the fancy took him. But Michael Joe Ryan was quite a well-known and commercially successful engineer, and he was quite excited to be going to Bob's garage. He said he was quite well off. He said he bought a 3-story house with his career. He was quite comfortable. He says, and I went to this garage and I realized I could have got my entire house comfortably inside Bob's garage. Because when you walk in what was the garage, it is in fact, to all intents and purposes, a studio with a separate control room and window and all the gear. So he said it's not quite what you think it is. It's not like recording, he says, in my garage. It's not like recording it in my garage. But he was impressed with Bob. Bob listened to Debbie Gold particularly about his performances. He had no lyric sheets with him at all for any of the songs. He just sang them, from memory in the middle of the studio, and did quite a few more than this, apparently. I quite like this album. It's not one I turn to again and again, And before I go on to that, by the way, we haven't talked about the magazine for this album, which is again a magnificent product. And if anyone is a serious student of Bob Dylan, they'll be missing something if they don't get hold of this. I mean, I don't know. On the back of this album, with a list of the songs, there's nothing inside. It's just a blank polyline sleeve. There's a picture of Bob playing his acoustic guitar on stage. He often did acoustic sections in the sets in this period of, indeed, many of these old songs. He and other old songs. He went into songs the audience didn't know quite a lot. So the picture research is incredible in the album, and that's the snapshot for this album. So he did this, and he put it out, and to his surprise, it was very well received. The last thing he ever expected. To be honest, he had tried to do an album before this album with a band, and a producer was a guy called David Bromberg, who'd been a session musician on New Morning and Self Portrait albums like that. And a couple of tracks have escaped out of that onto the Bootleg series, for example. But there's a whole load of tracks. I mean, it mentions it briefly, as everything is mentioned very briefly, indeed, in this. Hello, are you still there, Sib?
Yeah.
It says here,
Still awake.
It said he recorded 30 tracks with David Bromberg, with a band, and they were mainly cover versions. There might have been a couple of originals in that, but he was mainly interested in these songs he was playing every night. And he was also, I think, as ever in this area of his life, a bit disillusioned with his own writing. He in interviews, he was often saying things like, a typical quote from Bob was, "I've already written a lot of songs. There are so many songs in the world. Does the world really need any more songs?" And that's not somebody who's top of his game.
And to be fair, that's a sentiment I've often thought when I've listened to a Bob Dylan album.
Thank you, Bob. I called you Bob there. But anyway, this album, I think it's all right. I think it's very pleasant. I think he plays the guitar quite well on it, actually. I think to be honest, sometimes that's not a thing you can take for granted. But I do like Blackjack Davy. I like Jim Jones. I like Canna-Dio. I like that's a good one. And Arthur McBride's a great track. You put it on and it passes the time. What did you think of this record?
I think so. I'd not heard it before, as is common with all of these later Bob Dylan albums. I don't know what I was doing when these things came out, but I'm just completely not aware of any of them. Totally off my radar. I think my first impression was that I thought I quite like. I mean, it's obviously some kind of return to the kind of touchstones of the beginnings of his career. Yeah. And from that point of view, I think probably Dylanologists can probably get a lot out of that. I think it's hard to dislike an album like this, because it's you can't slag the writing off, for example.
That's one of your main things as well, So,
so I found myself, as you've just said, this is a perfectly acceptable way to pass a bit of time. It's not demanding, and it doesn't, and the performances are probably about adequate, I would have thought, and it works on its own terms. I think it works very well. I was trying to think of other albums like it by other artists, and admittedly, it's been a very busy week, so I wasn't able to do any research on it. But I would be interested to compare and contrast, perhaps, in an afterlife, if there is one, kind of how this compares, how this kind of return to the source material, as it were, the kind of the strands that, you know, Dylan concocted himself from.
Yes.
I'd be interested to sort of see how other artists of a similar generation, whether or not they return to these sources. But as I say, I didn't have the time to do the research, unfortunately. So overall, you know, I'd give it a thumbs up. As I say, it's very hard to you know, to find fault with an album like this. You know, it's also it's not very demanding, and it is what it is, you know. But yeah, it's okay. I can see why Dylan fans might, you know, sort of not regard it as a powerhouse of a Dylan album kind of thing, because it doesn't have, you know, the usual tropes that you'd associate with a Dylan album per se. It doesn't have, you know, the slightly shoddy guitar playing. It doesn't have the impossibly over-egged lyrics, etc., etc. But yeah, okay.
Well, the following year, Bob did it again with this album, World Gone Wrong, which has got a rather striking cover, actually. But in a world where Bob Dylan covers have been adequate at best, I like this cover a lot. This is Bob in Camden. This is in London. He's gone to see Dave Stewart. He's come to London to go to an exhibition in London, an art and photography exhibition. And he ends up making a video for a song off this album with Dave Stewart and a small team. And we've seen it for the track Blood in My Eyes, which is a I prefer this album, to be honest. I think this is a better album than Good As I've Been to You. I think this works as a coherent album in a way that the mood of it is really quite striking, this album. And it's partly, I don't know, it's partly because I'm influenced by this was recorded in exactly the same way with the same engineer at his garage. This is exactly the same setup in a different set of sessions. And he's trying to go back to the touchstones that started him off. He's in a terrible slump of doubting his own worth again. But this album is memorable. First of all, there's the video, Blood on Your Eyes, where he just dressed like this with his walking cane. He walks around Camden, and people just notice him as he walks around, and he ends up walking across a bridge, leading a huge crowd of young and old people, wondering why the hell Bob Dylan is walking around Camden, and he's just walking like this. And they'll just everyone just starts following him, and he's stopping and talking to old ladies and signing their autographs for them. And waitresses are coming up to him, and he's having conversations with them. It's a charming video. But one of the other things about this record that's a bit different is he writes sleeve notes, which is again, he's not done this for a long time. About the songs, it says brackets, what they're about. Thank you, Bob, for that. But he goes into this is very well written. This is very well written indeed. And he lives with these songs. The song Love Henry. Love Henry is a traditionalist ballad, traditionalist in inverted commas. Tom Paley used to do it, a perverse tale. Henry, modern corporate man off some foreign boat, unable to handle his psychosis, responsible for organizing the intelligentsia, disarming the people, an infantile sensualist, white teeth, wide smile, lots of money, kowtows to fairy queen exploiters and corrupt religious establishments. Career-minded, limousine double-parked, imposing his will and dishonest garbage in popular magazines. He lays his head on a pillow of down and falls asleep. He should have known better. He must have had a hearing problem. That's Henry Lee there. Love Henry. And he goes into all the different versions, and most noticeably, he ends like this. He's getting pissed off with people calling the tour the Never-Ending Tour, the Never-Ending Tour, or as in Dylan circles, the NET. That's what you've got to call it from now on. Said the NET. Unfortunate for me, I live in Nottingham, and NET is the local tram company. So whenever I see a story in the local paper, I think, God, Bob Dylan's never-ending tour is coming to Nottingham. Anyway, he said, he says, by the way, he ends this piece, don't be bewildered by the never-ending tour chatter. There was a never-ending tour, but it ended in 91 with the departure of guitarist G.E. Smith. That one's long gone, but there have been many others since then. And this is coming out, remember, in 1993, this album. So he then goes into a list of tours he's been on since 91, 2 years earlier. The Money Never Runs Out tour, fall of 91. The Southern Sympathizer tour, early 92. Why Do You Look at Me So Strangely tour, Europe, 92. The One Sad Cry of Pity tour, Australia and West Coast America, 92. The Principles of Action tour, Mexico, South America, 92. The Outburst of Consciousness tour, 92. Don't Let Your Head Go Down tour, 93. And others, too many to mention, each with their own character and design. To know which was which, consult the playlists. Anyway, thanks, Bob, for your help there with that one. This album, I think, has got a fundamentally coherent mood, as I said. I think Blood in My Eyes is a tremendous song that would fit on some of his later albums. World Gone Wrong is a great song. Love Henry. Broke Down Engine is a great song. Delia is a great song. Two Soldiers is a great song. And so I have basically the same overall feelings for this album as the other one. It's a pleasant diversion, but I think this one is more diverting, and I think it was more involving. Also, they seem to have pulled out all the stops in the picture research department here, because you won't believe this. This is a picture that's not on the sleeve. And it points out Dylan was getting a bit more visible here. He's really lent his support to political candidates, but here he is at the inauguration for President Bill Clinton. And although he tries to remain apolitical, Bob only appears at the inauguration ceremonies of Democrat presidents. He never turns up for the Republicans. So, he says he played Chimes of Freedom, his old song Chimes of Freedom at this. On this occasion, Dylan stood up alone in the wind with Quincy Jones's band accompanying him out of sight. It was a hurried rendition of the song, indecipherable to the uninitiated.
Yeah, I bet.
And while Chelsea Clinton appeared bemused, Presidents Bill and Henry grinned and whispered to each other throughout. 4 months later, he went into the studio to record this album. What did you think of this one?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because you would think it would be. It sounds the same, you know. It's the guitar and the. But actually, there is something about it that I just found. I mean, maybe I've just heard one too many versions of Froggy Went to Court, and
that's on the previous one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Forever, doesn't it? Yeah.
So in a way that, whilst I said the other album was, you know, not unpleasant, but nothing, you know, nothing terribly engaging, I did find with this one, knowing nothing about the background to it or anything like that, you know, I realized, oh God, there isn't a band on this. It's more of the same, you know. It's more of the acoustic thing. But by the time I sort of realized that, you know, I was like 4 songs in or something, you know.
Yeah.
And my interest was held. There was some, I'm not sure why, but I was.
I think it's a bit mysterious as well.
I was engaged by it.
Yeah.
I can't put my hand on my heart and say, you know, there's a better performance or something like that, because I'm not sure I'm smart enough to pick that nuance up. But
no, I think his guitar playing is worse on this record.
Well, I think his guitar playing is always variable, and you know, to kind of criticise Bob Dylan for his guitar playing, as I often do, is a bit, is a bit cheap, really, because
bit childish and cheap, yeah.
It's Bob Dylan. You don't expect him to be able to play a decent guitar, but anyway, I thought, yeah, there was just something about the mood of the songs. The sound is broadly comparable to the previous album, but something about the mood caught me. Maybe I was just in a different mood.
Yeah, but it's interesting because that's how I feel.
So much so that I actually listened to this album. I hope you're sitting down. I actually listened to this album twice. And yeah, I know. And sort of enjoyed it more or less at the same points on the first listen. I think a song that I also didn't realize that until afterwards that Dylan hadn't written these songs, So
yeah. He does inhabit the songs a lot on this record, I think.
Not knowing that he hadn't written them. I thought some of these were. I just thought they were Bob Dylan songs in the style of. But so a few of the songs I thought were really good. I thought. Oh God, hang on a second. I'll have to look up the names of them. Hang on a second. I've made a note here.
You consult your detailed notes in.
Broke Down Engine I really enjoyed.
That's a great.
Yeah. There was a couple on the other side that I didn't mind. Sorry, on that side that I didn't mind. But Broke Down Engine I really liked. Two Soldiers, yeah,
That's a good.
Goes on a little bit, but they all do. And funny enough, Lone Pilgrim, I don't know what it was about Lone Pilgrim, but I really liked that. It had a sort of a charm to it, which was very engaging. And then the final sort of observation, I didn't know, as I say, I didn't know what the album, anything about the making of the album or anything like that. But I found the cover and I thought, wow, that's a really interesting cover. And if you remember a long time ago, we used to sort of look, we used to mention occasionally what the album cover was like,
Yeah.
And to be honest, as you've already admitted, you don't have to do that very much with Bob Dylan album covers.
Not later on, particularly, yeah.
Not later on, because there is a very cursory element to them all. But I have to say, I thought that that cover, what it reminded me of in terms of the color palette, and that those kind of saturated yellows or ochres, it reminded me of some of the Bill Smith studio work from around the same time. I mean, I'm not saying it. I'm just in terms of the color palette. That's all. And I thought it was a particularly good. I thought it was a good portrait of an artist at that point in his life. I thought there was a lot going for it. The placing of the portrait behind, etc., etc. So it felt like it had, the album cover felt like it had a presence to it, and the music actually had a presence to it. Whereas the other album, the cover artwork for the one that was before this one, it just looks like somebody from the graphics department, like slapped together. Let's find a portrait of Bob, bung it on, stick across the letter set, put the letters in, and job's done. Whereas
if you look at the difference for that,
I mean, it's not bad, but
that's the art director, isn't it? This is actually
that's a difference.
And also, I told you come to see an exhibition in London. That exhibition was by a woman called Anna Maria Velez, and he came to see the exhibition. And of course, this says photo front cover by Anna Maria Velez. He's actually made contact with the artist, and she's taken and that's a proper picture, that's a proper artist taking that picture. She
Yeah.
knows what she's doing, and he's doing what she says.
Yeah.
And you know, the story of the trip to London is very odd. I mean, there's a guy called Andrew Muir, a big Dylan fan. He actually met Dylan for the only time in his life on this tour, because a bloke he knowed in a record shop in London goes, "Bob Dylan's in the coffee shop across the road, mate." He goes, "You don't take the piss." He goes, "No, he is." And he rushed down there, and he ended up having a conversation with Dylan and giving him his magazine he produced. He goes, "Do you do all this yourself?" Dylan's going, and he goes, "You take it with you." He says, "I can have this." And he put it in his inside pocket. And when he got in the car, he could see Dylan reading this magazine about himself in the back seat. But Anna Marie Velez was with him, and David Stewart. Dave Stewart late at night was with his wife in Crouch End at their home. And early hours of the morning, they get a phone call. "Hi, Dave, it's Bob. I've just arrived in London." And he goes, "Bob? Oh, Bob Dylan." And this is also the time when he went to somebody else's house in Crouch End, the famous story. He thought he got Dave Stewart's Crouch End address. He knocked on the door. A woman answers the door. He said, "Is Dave in?" And this woman, just by sheer chance, was married to a different Dave who had nipped out to the corner shop. She goes, "He's just out of the shop. He'll be back in a minute," thinking this is some old mate of his. So Dylan comes in. He was like, "A cup of tea?" And he said, "Oh, I'd love a cup of tea, thanks." And she didn't know who it was. And he's having a cup of tea, Dylan, and biscuits, and chatting to her. And 10 minutes later, her husband comes back in with the paper or whatever. And she goes, "Oh, he's here now. I'll come." And she goes, "Dave, your mate Bob's here." And he's going, "Mate Bob?" And he walks in, and he is, by sheer chance, an enormous Bob Dylan fan. And he walks in the kitchen of Bob Dylan, who's sat there wondering, who the hell's that? And he's going, and one of those, and eventually the twin bafflement. He says, "I'm looking for Dave Stewart," and "Oh, I know where he lives. He lives around the corner." So Bob's misadventures are legendary. That's a legendary Bob Crouch End story there. He said he really enjoyed it. The really nice cup of tea, and
Good.
But he got the wrong house. But yeah, so anyway, he joined him, and they shot the video while they were walking around Camden, basically on the hoof. There was no big crew.
Yeah,
I think Anna Velez may have had a video camera, and they shot it. And Dylan is just an incredible presence walking down the street, and she's across the road or further down the pavement, watching as people are going. You know, when we walks past them, they're going, and then they're following him. You know, and he just stops, and he's listening to them like this, and they're getting things out of the pockets, and he's just going, you know, and he's I think he's got like a big pen, and he's wearing black leather gloves, so he's signing all these autographs with his black leather gloves on it. It's a very striking video, and if you get the chance to see, blood in my eye.
I'll have to have a look. The other thing, just very briefly, was you were saying that this is a time when Dylan isn't writing songs himself, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a low point creatively for him. Serious point. I'd not heard. I've not read the sleeve notes that you mentioned on the back of the album. But when you were reading them out about whatever song it was, I can't remember what the song was like a minute ago that you were reading out. It doesn't matter. But when you were reading them out,
it was Love Henry. That was, yeah.
Yeah, when you were reading them out, it occurred to me, because they were very entertaining. It occurred to me, I thought, why doesn't he just set that to music? Why doesn't he write that as the song? And find some dirge of a track that would naturally fall from his fingertips, and just recite that, because that would be, probably good enough, And
if only you his manager said, but he got generally, they didn't set the world alight, these records.
No.
But he wasn't bothered, and they did get a lot of critical kind of respect. And you got people like David Bowie. He really liked these albums. I suspect he liked this one, but he kept saying that 2 albums of traditional songs, as he put it. He says he was really struck by them. He really liked playing them.
Yeah.
And that's quite important, because I think the next record in our series is one that had a deeper effect on Bowie. But we'll come to that next episode. What was your favourite song off these two records?
Probably off this one, probably Broke Down Engine, or possibly Lone Pilgrim. The other one, I've got to be honest, I would need to. I would need to play it again, and I have to be honest with you. I've no great desire to, but
okay. Well, mine on this one is Blood in My Eyes, and I quite like Blackjack Davy on the other one. But I will say this is a better album. This is markedly superior to Good As I've Been to You, I think, and he was really into it at this stage. And if you look at the credits, the team is entirely the same just a year later. Same mastering engineer, same modus operandi. He just does it better this time, I think. And what I'd say. All right.
Okay.
So next time,
what's the next album?
In episode 32 of our series, we've got I've just knocked the two albums off the edge of the table there. That was a bit unfortunate. Episode 32 will be a major album. It'll be Time Out of Mind. Dylan forgets about not writing songs and writes some songs. And he calls in Daniel Lenoir to help him record them.
Excellent.
See you next time.
See you next time.